Hi! Welcome to another fruitful discussion with Mrs. M. So today we'll need to continue our discussion on evidence. So last meeting we have emphasized on the role, the responsibilities of a forensic chemist, and we have also provided an introduction on evidence. So now let's focus on the various kinds of evidence. So evidence may be direct, indirect, or commonly known as circumstantial, okay, which includes circumstantial, and also it can be hearsay. So now let us discuss and expound what is a direct evidence. So, when you say direct, meaning to say it can be perceived by our senses. So, it can be sensed by our eyes, it can be heard, it can be smelled, it can be touched, and it can even be tasted if you like so. Okay? So in most cases, no witness is present at the scene of the crime, or even if there is or are witnesses, he or they are not willing to testify. So the necessity of resorting to other means of proof is superbly essential. So crimes, we need to remember that crimes are normally done secretly. Ano man, is there any perpetrator na ganahang mo commit o crime and disclose it to other people that they will commit a crime or they have committed a crime? So dili yun na, it is always done secretly. So usually the perpetrator seeks the darkness, the remote areas, in order to cover or conceal the misdeed they have committed. So therefore, it is necessary to use all other available modes of procuring evidence in order to establish and prove a case in court. We need to remember that our direct evidence is a strong evidence. It is sufficient enough, okay, to result or to provide conviction. On the other hand, another type of evidence is circumstantial or also known as indirect evidence. So ganina, if it is mentioned here that it is automatically perceived by our senses, on a different note, when you say circumstantial, it is a kind of evidence which seeks to establish a conclusion by inferences from the facts proven. So I will give you a very good illustration for this given example. So while a policeman was patrolling, he heard the scream from the house. Then he immediately ran to the house, and then there he saw a man coming out from carrying a bloody knife. So the policeman arrested the man and subsequently entered the house. There he saw a female cadaver lying on the floor with a stab wound on the breast. In this given case or illustration, the only direct evidence to which is the policeman can testify that to the facts that he saw a man coming out of the house with a bloody knife, where the scream came from. So the prosecutor may establish a conclusion that the man with the bloody knife is the criminal by inference from the facts stipulated by the policeman. Okay? Another, we need to, but larong inference ra ang kayang mahatag sa ato ang prosecutor simply because even if the police officer mentioned that he saw a man running palayo sa balay with a bloody knife, but then again, such testimony of the police officer is not enough. That is why diha musulod ang atuang indirect evidence. Ganun dili enough because we are not directly sure that it is the man na nidalagan palayo sa balay ang ni-stab sa babae. Ang ni-stab siyang left breast. And we are not even sure that the blood that is found sa knife is really the blood of a human, and such blood of a human is from the victim. So, dili man siya sure. That is why musulod ang atong, again, inference or circumstantial evidence. So, under the present law, circumstantial evidence is sufficient for conviction if there is more than one circumstances. So, sa may but pasabot ani, one inference is not enough. It should always be corroborated with other piece of evidence. Okay? Or additional circumstantial evidence must be presented in court. Another, the facts from which the inferences are divided are proven. Another, the combination of all circumstances is such to produce conviction beyond reasonable doubt. Okay? Another is hearsay evidence. So it is a statement made by a witness or an authority of another and not from his own knowledge or observation. So hearsay in general is not really admissible as evidence at the court. However, there are certain types of hearsay that are acceptable as evidence at the court. Okay, so these are the common examples of hearsay that are acceptable as evidence at the court. The very common and the very famous dying declaration. Okay, may napod mo. Ma'am, sa example of dying declaration. Okay, I will give you a very good example. Okay, so for example, si Mr. A was stabbed by Mr. B and then Mr. C, nakakita dayon, Mr. A gave a mention nga ang ni-stab niya is si Mr. B. So in that case, that will fall to a dying declaration. Okay? So if Mr. C will be called to testify in court, ang iyahang statement regarding sa information stipulated and divulged by Mr. A na si Mr. B ang ipatay niya is already considered as a dying declaration. And it is admissible, acceptable as evidence in court. Another is, very common, rest to stay, declaration against interest, family reputation or trade, common reputation. What else? Part of rest to stay, part of entries in the course of business. What else? Entries in the official records, then testimony or disposition at a former proceeding. So these are examples of hearsay that are admissible as evidence in court. Alright? Pero kana maingon imong silingan, nga niingon si silingan A, nga bahog ilog si silingan B. That will not fall as admissible evidence in court. Alright? Okay? So now, before proceeding to the various forms of scientific evidence, okay, so let us first expound more about the evidence. Okay, so sa giingon dere, that a direct evidence is defined as evidence that directly proves a key fact at issue. So I will give you another good example of a direct evidence. Like for example, you saw Mr. B nga iyahang gi-stab, you saw Judah. Okay, you saw Mr. B na iyang gi-stab si Mr. C. So if that is the case, that is not an example of a circumstantial, but rather it is an example of direct evidence. Because you saw it, nga si Mr. B ni-stab ni Mr. C. Or another good example, in the case of rape, yung pagkahuman, pag-ato mo kasagingan because you want to pee, nakakita ka nga, the girl was forced to have a sexual intercourse against her will, ani nga tawana. So in that case, what you saw, kita kang gi-rape siya, is already an example of a direct evidence. Or another good example, nakakita dyan ka mismo, siya mo yun kuha sa kwarta, or kuha sa cellphone, or forge sa usa ka document, then that is an example of a direct evidence because it is automatically perceived by your senses. Another, Your indirect evidence, also referred to as circumstantial evidence, is as what I've said, is totally different from your direct. Kaya kung direct, automatically perceived by your senses, but your circumstantial is, allows you to use your inferences. So this allow a person to infer the fact that issue. Like for example, katong giingon ganina, nga katong ato ang given example, nga though it is true that a policeman saw Mr. A running with a bloody knife, but then again, that will not be considered as a direct evidence simply because there is no direct proof that it's really the man who stabbed the victim, who stabbed the cadaver. And there is no direct piece of evidence that would say that the blood that is found on the knife or on the bloody knife is really the blood of a human being and is really the blood of the victim. Okay? So for example, a direct evidence like in the case of murder is a witness testifying that he saw or she saw the defendant actually stab and kill the victim. So, that is an example of a direct, kita jud ka, caught in the act. While, your indirect evidence, which is on the same case sa gyapon, murder, a witness testified that he saw the defendant running away from the crime scene. So, if that is the case, there is no, the so-called caught in the act is not present. What you saw is only, he was running. So, therefore, that is an example as indirect evidence. So direct and indirect evidence are used in both criminal and in civil cases. La? Okay. Alright, so we will continue this one later. Bye guys!